Arguably, Giorgia Meloni's crowning political achievement has been the way that she's effectively monopolised the right-wing vote in Italy. In a decade or so at the helm, she's taken the Brothers of Italy from single digits to about 30% in the polls, where they've hovered since the 2022 general election. At the same time, the two other big right-wing parties in Italian politics, Forza Italia and Lega, have been reduced to shadows of their former selves, and now languish below the 10% mark. However, in the past couple of months, yet another right-wing party has emerged to challenge Meloni's dominance, Futuro Nazionale, or National Future, a party created last year by retired Army General Roberto Vannacci, which is rapidly surging in the polls. So, in this video, we're going to take a look at this new upstart, and why, even if they never get near Brothers of Italy in the polls, they still pose a real problem for Meloni. Recent elections in Denmark, Slovenia, Bulgaria and Hungary have shaken up the state of European politics, with major new trends emerging. We dissect these elections in the latest issue of our magazine, as well as explaining what's changing in Europe. That's just one of 80 pages in the magazine, because there's more in too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, to understand where Vannacci has come from, you need to know a bit about his previous party, Lega, or League in English. When the party was founded in 1989, they were actually called Lega Nord, or Northern League, and were mostly focused on achieving more autonomy for northern Italy, which is significantly richer and more industrialised than the south. After a solid result at the 1996 general election, where they won 10% of the vote nationwide but a plurality in the north, Lega Nord took things a step further, and announced that they wanted northern Italy to fully secede, and become its own country called Padania. This didn't really work, and the party won just 4% of the vote at the next election in 2001. Lega Nord struggled to find their footing for a few years, but enjoyed an electoral resurgence under Matteo Salvini, who became their leader in 2013. Interestingly, Salvini came from the left of the party, and was originally an ardent secessionist. In 1997, he even ran as a communist for the internationally unrecognised Padanian parliament. Once he became leader, however, Salvini stopped focusing so much on secession, and rebranded the party as just Lega rather than Lega Nord. Instead, Salvini started focusing more on more classic right-wing issues, including immigration and the EU, with Lega originally supporting an Italian withdrawal from the Eurozone. This pivot worked spectacularly well. Having polled in the single digits for most of the 2010s, Lega came third in 2018, winning 17% of the vote, more than any other right-wing party, before actually winning the 2019 European elections with 34% of the vote. However, the one big downside to this strategy was that it essentially created two factions within Lega. A more traditional faction of essentially small c conservatives focused on northern autonomy, and a more modern faction of, for lack of a better term, right-wing populists, focused more on cultural issues. This wasn't a problem when Lega was surging in the polls and everyone was happy, but it's become a problem now that Lega are, once again, polling in the single digits. The Conservatives blame the populists and the populists blame the Conservatives, and both have been threatening to ditch the other for the past year or so. Vannacci's new party essentially represents the populists leaving. Vannacci was brought in by Salvini in 2024 in an attempt to breathe new life into the party, and has been Salvini's deputy for the past year or so. He had risen to political prominence a year earlier in 2023, after self-publishing a book called The World Upside Down. The book had all the usual right-wing talking points, taking aim at political correctness, feminism, immigrants, and even the quote international gay lobby, and quickly became a bestseller. Originally, it looked like Salvini's decision to bring Vannacci into Lega might pay off. And in the 2024 European elections, Vannacci personally received more than 500,000 preference votes, roughly 1.5% of the national total. But almost immediately, Vannacci started making trouble for Lega, frequently describing himself as an independent and organising rallies without Lega's sign-off. This went down badly with both Salvini and the autonomy-focused conservative faction in Lega, who have been pushing for Salvini to expel Vannacci for months. This finally came to a head in February, when, after months of flirting with the idea, Vannacci announced that he would be starting his own party, Futuro Nazionale, or National Future. Predictably, Vannacci described National Future as centre-right, but his policy platform is significantly more right-wing than basically any other centre-right party in the European mainstream. On immigration, for instance, Vannacci wants to slash the number of foreigners living in Italy to 4% of the total population, down from about 9% at the moment. This would imply expelling or remigrating somewhere between 2 and 3 million people, which, given immigrants are generally younger than the median Italian, would exacerbate Italy's pre-existing demographic crisis. To fix this, however, Vannacci also wants to introduce more economic incentives for Italians to have kids, including a per-child reduction in income tax, state-guaranteed mortgages for first-time buyers with lower interest rates the more kids you have, and a sort of salary for stay-at-home mothers. Vannacci also wants to reintroduce work permits for teenagers as young as 14 years old, cut benefits and taxes for small and medium-sized business, and oppose basically any green policy, instead pushing for a singular focus on reducing energy costs, even if that means buying oil and gas from Russia. On foreign policy, Vannacci is generally Eurosceptic and relatively pro-Russia. He opposes both sanctions on Russia and the idea of Ukraine ever joining the EU. Relatedly, he's also opposed to increases in defence spending, largely because he doesn't think Russia is a threat. Like other right-wingers in Italy, Vannacci has a habit of equivocating about Italy's fascist past. He's described dictator Benito Mussolini as a statesman and said that the March on Rome in 1922, when the fascist party took power, was not a coup, but nothing more than a street demonstration. More generally, Vannacci presents National Future as a true right-wing alternative to the governing coalition, comprising the Brothers of Italy, Lega and Forza Italia, that he argues has become too moderate on certain issues, particularly foreign policy. This pitch has apparently worked. 8 MPs have already defected from the governing coalition to National Future, including 7 from the populist faction in Lega, but also 1, Emanuele Pozzolo, from the Brothers of Italy. They've steadily risen in the polls to around the 5% mark, and a recent poll suggests that they might have already overtaken Lega. If Vannacci can continue to peel voters away from Lega, National Future could plausibly poll around the 10% mark in the near future. This all poses a real problem for Meloni, because polls currently put the left and right blocs in Italian politics neck and neck, which means, after the next election due in 2027, Meloni might well struggle to form a majority without Vannacci. This leaves Meloni with a difficult dilemma. She can either try to bring Vannacci in, but risk alienating more moderate voters, or she can stick it out with the current coalition, and risk being outflanked. The latest issue of our magazine is out now, and if you want our best value ever, subscribing and using code SUMMER26 gets you your first copy for as cheap as £4.99, as well as 20% off as long as you stay subscribed. I told you about one of the articles at the start of this video, but this issue's truly jam-packed with content from all around the world. Obviously, the headline section is our rundown of Trump's wars around the world, discussing all of the different countries and regions which have faced Trump's military wrath, going nation by nation through the timeline, and reaching the ultimate question, has Trump created the modern holy war? From there, we dive into our regional sections, starting with the UK, where we unpack the results of the recent elections, take a look at the UK's odd foreign posture, and discuss if Britain has become ungovernable. Then, in the EU section, we discuss how Russia's sphere of influence is fading, why Europe's energy transition isn't what you expect, as well as looking at the Euro's missing members. Finally, in the global section, we discuss if we're seeing echoes of the First World War, what's next for Iran, as well as what really came from the Gen Z protests we saw emerging last year. That's not even everything. With this 80-page issue, our joint longest ever, there's even more to read than I've even been able to mention here. So click the link in the description to learn more and grab your copy today.